Hello, everyone. This is Pam Moore, Director of the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. I'm also part of the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee, and I'm here to introduce Legal Wellbeing in Action, a podcast series offered by the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee. Last year was the first full year of the Wellbeing Committee at work. In identifying ways to bring well-being education and initiatives to the New Mexico legal community, we created a 2021 campaign called What a Healthy Lawyer Looks Like. 2021 is dedicated to educating the New Mexico legal community on a variety of well-being topics that pertain to work and home life. Our goal is that every judge, lawyer, law student, and legal staff person can find some aspect of their mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual health to improve upon. We strive to educate, encourage, and support the New Mexico legal community to show up as their best self in all aspects of life, which means we will be covering a wide variety of topics that relate to the whole human self. Thank you for being here today listening to Legal Wellbeing in Action.
Hello everyone, Tanessa Akins here. I am the Clinical Coordinator for the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program, and also the podcast series coordinator. This month's episode will be featuring the topic of compassion fatigue. As part of the 2021 campaign, What a Healthy Lawyer Looks Like, we are featuring monthly wellness topics in articles published to the State Bar of New Mexico's Bar Bulletin, and airing each of the month's topics in our podcast episodes. To learn more about this campaign or to view the articles, please visit the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee's webpage at www.sbnm.org. For any further questions or learn how you can get involved, please email me, Tanessa Akins, at teakins@sbnm.org. I will now turn it over to our speakers, Mr. Bill Slease, Ms. Rebecca Kitson, and Ms. Sarah Armstrong. Thank you to each of you for volunteering your time to this very important topic. And a big thank you also to our listeners for tuning into Legal Wellbeing in Action. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Tanessa, for that introduction, and thank you for having us on Legal Wellbeing in Action. Today, we're going to talk about compassion fatigue, and I am Bill Slease. I am the Professional Practice Program Director for the State Bar of New Mexico, and I'm really honored to have with me today two individuals who I've had the pleasure of working with before. And let me just briefly introduce each of them. We have Rebecca Kitson from Rebecca Kitson Law. Rebecca's firm is an immigration law firm and provide a variety of services related to immigration matters. And Sarah Armstrong. Sarah is with Armstrong, Roth, Whitley, Johnston Family Law, one of the founding partners. And as you might guess, practices in family law. So thank you both for the generosity of your time and spending a few minutes to talk to us today about compassion fatigue. And let's just jump right in. Compassion fatigue. Rebecca, what are we talking about? What is that?
I think compassion fatigue it's one of those things where, if you're working and the definition of compassion is to suffer with others. And I think that it's something that the well runs dry. So when you're working a lot with people who are in suffering and you're working with them, to find that you don't have much to draw from in order to be present for them.
Right. And sometimes, Sarah, it's called secondary trauma. How is it showing up? I mean, when we talk about what it is, why isn't it just burnout? Lawyers go through sort of ups and downs in their practice. It can be a demanding day. It can be demanding weeks, sometimes demanding months. Why isn't burnout? Or is it? Is it just burnout and this is just another fancy way for lawyers to talk about what's going on?
Well, lawyers love to talk about fancy things, don't they? I think it's different. And I think sort of the secondary trauma language is really helpful when we're talking about this, is because when you're talking about areas of the law, and I think this is true of family law, and I can only imagine it's probably even more true in immigration where Rebecca practices, where it is the legal system can be very traumatic, and the things that people are going through are very, very traumatic for the people who are engaged in the legal system. And so that can't help but sort of be passed along to an attorney. And so it's not just the same as, oh, I'm tired, I need a vacation. It really is sort of this feeling of absorbing their trauma, their feelings. And really, I think most of us come to this work because we really want to help people. I know that I practiced in other areas of the law before I came to family law. And once I got to family law, the reason why I really embraced it and I feel like found a home in terms of being a lawyer was because it's very real. You're helping people with really very real day-to-day problems, which can be very satisfying. It can also be really, really incredibly stressful. And I think it's that waking up at 3 a.m. and wishing you could make things different and really feeling like that's your job as counsel to fix every single thing for these people, and sort of getting to the point where you have to say, I can't do that. I'm one person. I am one part of this person's whole life. I'm part of this legal issue that they're dealing with, and I can't fix all of that stuff. And then really having to recognize the damage that feeling can cause to us as practitioners.
Yeah, and when we talk about burnout, the symptoms can be similar for sure. I mean, burnout sometimes will show up in lack of diligence in attending to work, avoiding others, including clients, which of course can lead to some problems both with client interaction as well as regulatory authorities. Some difficult decisions. Sarah, you mentioned waking up at 3 a.m, that perseveration where you're just mulling and rolling. But compassion fatigue, I think, is usually a little more pervasive than burnout. It sometimes it's beyond that. It's some hopelessness, some strong feelings of anxiety, some emotional numbing. And you touched on something in terms of the source of it, and I want to explore that just a little bit. Rebecca, you've worked from maybe even before law school in immigration. Is that right? So this has been something that's been a passion of yours for a long time, but you're just helping people, right? That's what you're seeing every day is all rainbows and unicorns about bringing people to the United States for the great opportunity, right? What is it that leads to that compassion fatigue, that sense of perseveration, that anxiety, that all of that goes along with it? What is it that you're seeing?
Well, I think it would be strange to have somebody mention rainbows and unicorns and immigration in the same sentence, except for the fact that I think we're all hoping for finding unicorns sometimes and getting protection for families and individuals. I mean, the thing with immigration, I think that's challenging is just like Sarah mentioned, really wanting to be able to help people. I always say that I came to this area of law because I really love my clients. They're wonderful people from all over the world. They've been through extraordinary trauma overall. I mean, just even moving from your place of home or, leaving things behind, let alone asylum seekers, who have been through some of the most horrific trauma that we can imagine, and then wanting to lead, people through to a safer place. It's incredibly amazing work. It's a really wonderful thing to be part of when you are successful. I think the part of the real extreme difficulty and the toll that it takes is that within immigration, you lose a significant percentage. And even in just consulting with people, I usually say that, in discussing potential relief with families in particular, about 75% of the people that I talk to qualify for nothing. And so having to explain the legal system to them and why their circumstances don't warrant relief or protection under our laws does take its toll as well. And so being able to find comfort and meaning in the cases where we are successful, we are able to lead people through is really important, and being able to balance that out and be present for people, even in explaining to them why there's no pathway for them at this time.
Right. And so that's definitely one aspect of it, is that sense of frustration that comes when you can't help somebody, or I think Sarah mentioned it earlier, you've got clients looking at you to be the do-all, the everything, to solve the dilemma that they're in. And certainly in immigration, that's a tough row to hoe, because there's not a lot of path for accomplishing not just everything they might want, but even some of what they might want. which leads to that risk, of course, for the lawyers. But it also goes from another angle, right? Because if you look at the lawyers that at least some of the research suggests tend to be at higher risk of compassion fatigue because they're around individuals who are having more than just a difficult legal predicament. It's criminal law, it's immigration, it's bankruptcy, it's workers' comp, and of course, Sarah, one of the big leaders is family law, and that's more than you just not being able necessarily to accomplish everything somebody wants, right? I mean, in family law, there's other things going on.
Yeah, and there's people that they're having a really hard time, and it's the most important time of their life for most people. And it's involving their children, it's involving their finances, and it is the most important thing in their life. And they, I think, really expect it to be the most important thing in their lawyer's life too. And I think that especially earlier on in my career, I sort of fell prey to the idea that yes, every case has to be the most important thing in your life, but that's really unrealistic because no one really, it's rare that you would want a lawyer who's only had one case at a time for years, right? Because they don't learn anything. But I sort of think of it as, and this is kind of it might be a trite example, but it's when they talk about you have to put the air mask on yourself first before you can take care of other people, right? Like when you're in a plane, put it on yourself and then help a child. And so it really, I think the longer you practice, and I'm very grateful to be practicing in this era when people are talking about wellness and are really talking about self-care and are really explaining that being a lawyer does not mean that you never sleep and never see your family and deal with people, counsel being mean to you, and your counselor, sometimes your clients being mean to you, and you absorb all of that and somehow magically come up with solutions. And I think that I know when I was in law school, there was never even an inkling that you could say, I need to take a break. I have to take a step back. I can't be everything to everyone. And I know this is important to you, client, and it is. And I know it's the most important thing in your life. But if you want me to be able to help you, I also have to take care of myself. I also know I've had to be beat over the head with that for a really long time to sort of process that. I remember when people first started talking about self-care, I was like, oh, great. One more thing I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not getting done. I didn't even take a walk today. I'm the worst, and so really sort of embracing that. And I think that's when you really start talking about, that's how we can maintain compassion for our clients when we're taking care of ourselves. But that's hard. We're not trained as lawyers to do that.
Right. And it's what you talked about earlier. I mean, you have clients, family law and immigration and some of the other areas we mentioned, who just have really heavy emotional components to their cases, right? They're losing families, they're losing jobs, they're losing financial stability. Certainly in immigration cases, there's often a safety and a security issue. I mean, these are people who are at physical risk depending upon their situation. Their personal well-being, and of course, if you're a criminal law practitioner, and to some extent in immigration, right, there's a liberty aspect. I mean, some people maybe get put into jail or worse, and so those are the heavy emotional baggage they bring to the table. And as you both said, the idea that you're going to be that good advocate, that zealous advocate, you're going to carry that baggage with them as opposed to for them, which is what maybe they're hoping, but it still can have that toll. Now, you remember, of course, Rebecca, and Sarah just talked about it, in law school, all of the classes they devoted to teaching you how to handle that emotional baggage, right?
Yeah, not so much. I think it's interesting is that, even within law school, it has you're honored for, productivity and for hard work and for dedicating all that time and putting in time above and beyond. Productivity is self-worth. In law school, and sort of continues on. It's also, part of the culture of the legal profession is the idea is that when you're starting out as an associate, that you need to pay your dues, you need to learn the ropes, you need to really dig into these things, which, can work for a while. You can ride that, especially that passion, if you get that first job and you're really working at it, and especially if you're lucky enough to get into the area that you love and that inspired you to go to law school in the first place. was my case too. But I think that as a legal profession, especially now that we are in a position to be hiring associates and that sort of thing, to really recognize from the outset, and I know I try and do this within my firm, telling people you have to take time off. You really do need to find those boundaries and do it once we've graduated law school, if it's not necessarily part of the fabric that, of our learning at that time, and to recalibrate our expectations for new lawyers to be able to incorporate this from the very beginning, because it's really about time. Sarah mentioned it as well, is that, when people talk about self-care and they're like, oh, well, you need to take a yoga class or you need to take more vacation, and what that comes down to is really being able to look at your calendar and calendar properly to be able to be productive during the time that you have, to use your time wisely, but to also calendar the things that are important, to be able to do self-care. And that is exercise as well as, being able to sleep properly, not to be getting into work at, 5 o'clock in the morning, unless that's your jam and you leave early. But, really working your calendar is something that I've found has been really helpful to be able to prioritize the type of self-care activities, because if you don't have the time, you're not going to do it.
Yeah, and likewise, Sarah, do you recall any discussion? I certainly don't, in law school, about what you're going to get yourself into. Rebecca went into immigration. She knew before law school, maybe that's what she wanted. And to some extent, she knew maybe some of that emotional toll that was going to come with it. You transitioned to family law from other practice. Was there some thought, did you go and look for a course? Did you go in eyes wide open? I know how difficult this is going to be.
Well, certainly a lot of people warned me that I shouldn't do family law, but I didn't know at the time. I was not as fortunate as Rebecca to really have a passion for what I wanted to do specifically before I went to law school, which I think in a lot of ways was helpful. I've done different things that was sort of all part of my journey to get to a place where I really then knew what I wanted to do in terms of practicing family law. But no, what you heard was, oh my gosh, it's so hard, don't do it. And I remember what I heard in law school was, okay, here's your ethics instruction. You know what? Lawyers have a high rate of addiction, suicide, all these other things. So don't let that happen to you. And there you go. That was, and without any sort of idea of how you prevent that from happening or how exactly why it happened. It just was sort of this other one more thing on your list, things to do. Don't let that happen. Work all the time. And I think Rebecca really hit on it. You're just rewarded so much for working a lot, for not taking care of yourself, and what that means in terms of billable hours and all that stuff. It's very hard to break those habits, because probably most of us, if we're being honest, we were kind of those people before we went to law school and then we went to law school, right, and then that feeds it. And then you become a lawyer and everyone's like, oh my gosh, Sarah, you're here at 5 a.m. every day. Cause I am that person. And you just think, oh, this is what it means to really be a great lawyer. And some people can handle that workload, and good for them. But I think we really need to be reminding ourselves and each other that that's not the only way to be, and that's not the only way to be an effective advocate, and that's not the only way to really care about your clients and work for them.
Right, and I want to talk a little more about solutions, but I don't want to leave the notion of, and it's not an indictment of law school, because it's certainly the legal culture when you get out of law school. The first time I heard even the words compassion fatigue were years into practice, and the notion that I was carrying my client's emotional baggage never really occurred to me until suddenly I was carrying my client's emotional baggage as part of my notion of I'm going to be a good advocate for them. And really it's even a little bit more than that, right? In law school, we're taught you take the facts and you analyze them in a very clinical manner, and you apply the law to them and you come to a conclusion. And to be a good advocate, that's your role, right? Be that dispassionate advocate on behalf of the client. Be that objective voice of reason. Bring your client the bad news. Convince the court based on these facts. And it becomes very almost sanitized at that point. And as you said, Sarah, and you as well, Rebecca, to some extent, you're rewarded for that. Come in early, work hard, put that brief on paper. Don't, if you're going to avoid the compassion fatigue, the upset, emotionally numb yourself up, right? You shouldn't have that feeling you should be an automaton. What's the problem with that, Rebecca? You and I talked about that at one point. When you take your emotion out of the representation of the client to some extent, or when you take some compassion out, what does that mean? What does that mean for your effective advocacy?
Well, I mean, I think the heart of advocacy is really being able to speak for the client and be able to help tell their story. And to be an effective advocate, we are human beings. We live in story. It is, the story of somebody's lives. I mean, I know that Sarah was mentioning that as well, of what they're going through, what they're confronting. You have to be able to be emotionally present with your clients to be able to understand their story, and in order to reinterpret that and be the effective advocate for them. We can't sanitize things so much that we lose the passion, because then we don't become zealous advocates. We can't take it from being mediocre to being really excellent attorneys unless we are able to embrace and channel the power of storytelling. And we have to be with a client and be with them emotionally to be able to truly channel that magic.
Yeah, and what do you think, Sarah? How do you deal with that? Because certainly you see some fairly emotional clients. They're worried about losing their kids. They're worried about their financial situation going from pretty robust to half of what it used to be. Do you just turn all that off? Suck it up, client, because that's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to just argue this to the court, and you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit.
The Solutions Group, the State Bar of New Mexico's EAP provider, offers confidential and free professional counselors to support employees and their direct family members by offering short-term counseling, assessment, and referrals for any life struggle. This includes drug addiction, relationship conflict, anxiety, depression, and grief and loss. Other services include dependent care, crisis assessment, intervention, and educational presentations, free well-being webinars, and an online stress assessment tool. Call 505-254-3555 or 1-866-254-3555 and identify with NMJ Lab to schedule an appointment or video visit.
It's hard. And I think you have to learn that balance over time. I think part of it is working really hard at the beginning to set expectations. And Rebecca kind of talked about this, is that a really hard part. And I remember, it takes a while to learn this, is sort of saying, here's the bad news. You're not going to have what you had before. And even if you get the best result possible from the court, it's not going to be what you want. And you have to sort of learn to sit with that discomfort of telling people things they don't want to hear, which is hard. It's not fun. I often say I wish my job were scooping ice cream, because everyone would be so happy when I gave them the ice cream, and that's all they would get were happy things. But that's not, I think you really have to remind yourself that that's not really helping your client. And then also saying, we're not going to talk at 11 o'clock at night every night. I can't talk to you on the weekends. I have to carve out some time and set some boundaries, because also that's not going to help you. If I talk to you Saturday morning, the court's not even open. Do you know what I mean? So we're sort of saying, I understand this is stressful, and I can see where you're coming from. And how do we craft this representation so that you feel like you're being heard, but also what to expect in as much as you can? Because we all know too, we can't totally tell them what to expect. We don't know what a judge is going to do. We don't know what opposing counsel is going to come up with. As much as we can, setting those, and always really redoubling that effort, and sort of setting expectations, setting boundaries for yourself. But it's hard. And I think that's what happens when you really start to get that sort of compassion fatigue, is you let those things slide. And then you feel even more overwhelmed. And then you start making other mistakes, the sort of things that, get us in trouble professionally, right? Oh my gosh, I just can't return that call. I just don't want to deal with that client because I told them I would have it to them by Friday, and now I don't want to deal with it. And those are all very natural feelings, but they're a slippery slope for us as practitioners. And so that's partially why you've really got to be thinking about this stuff, or trying our best. And again, the more we hear it, I think it helps.
Right, and what I'm hearing from both of you, it's kind of that notion of you've got to be empathetic to what's going on with your client. You can't be so emotionally numb that you're not attuned to what's happening with them. And in fact, sometimes bringing what's happening to them to a court's attention because it's that important. If there's abuse in the household and you've got to raise that with the court, the individual who's subject to the abuse is feeling it in real time. Doesn't necessarily have to become your abuse, right? Or you absorb all of that pain. But you certainly got to be attentive to it and empathetic to it so you can explain to the court what's going on. Or, in your case, Rebecca, somebody who's going to get shipped back to where they came from that potentially is going to be put to death. And you've got to bring that passion to the court, empathetic without necessarily embracing it and pulling it all in. There's a physician from Canada, Gaber Mate, and he spent a lot of years working with patients challenged by mental health and addiction, but he spent recently some time on the concept of compassion fatigue, and he said, that's a misnomer. Professionals don't tire of being compassionate if they're good professionals. And it's what you were saying, Sarah, right? If you are tired of being, and you, Rebecca, if you're tired of being compassionate for your clients, well, now you're either avoiding them, which is a competence issue, a diligence issue, right? Or you so overly embrace that you're laying awake at 3 a.m, you're showing up at 5, but you're not leaving early. You're leaving at 10 at night, and it's just becoming all consuming. And in the meantime, your health is suffering. And so they don't tire of it. What they do is they don't take care of that self-care. And I want to spend a few more minutes talking about solutions, because I think when we talk about well-being, you both have balanced it very well. You've done a good job of keeping your well-being intact. And so let's talk a little about that. Even something as simple as what has been referred to as compassion satisfaction. So let's start within each of your practices. How do you find satisfaction within the practice when you have such emotional, tumultuous events going on? Rebecca, what do you do? Do you have a balance? I mean, there's been some speculation that the specialization, which both of you do, has led to the risk of compassion fatigue, because you don't get that balance. You don't get those scooping ice cream days where everybody's happy. So what do you do within the practice?
One of the things that we do is that we actually started this during COVID. We had done it to a certain extent before, but now it's a daily event, is that we distribute every approval notice that we get for every single work permit or, green card that comes in. Our part of our mail system and processing is to copy all of those and to distribute it to every single person on our team, so that we celebrate it. We take at least one moment, every single person of our team, to celebrate that that's transformative for whoever gets to receive it. And I think that really being able to take a moment, appreciate each other, lift each other up, and recognize each other's wins, and celebrate that together is super important. So we really try and take the good moments and sort of wrap it around you like a warm blanket and dig into that feeling when you can, because it's what I say to all of my staff too, is like, you get so much out of that. And that's really the reason that we're all here. We're here to support the families, one family at a time, and keep people together. And so it's really important to take a moment and sit with the wins when you have them.
Right. Celebrate those wins and not just have your own compassion satisfaction at that point, but share it with your team, which is wonderful. Mm-hmm. Sarah, same kind of thing. What do you do within the practice? I mean, you talked about setting boundaries with clients. That's a great way, right, to let them know, don't call me Saturday afternoon when I'm at home, because one, I can't really do much when the courts are closed. And two, let's have a productive conversation next week when the temperatures maybe have cooled a bit. But what else besides setting boundaries with your clients?
I love that idea of sharing the wins and having it so formalized. I think sometimes we forget to do that. I think the other thing, it's not just setting boundaries for yourself and your individual clients, but really us as a team supporting each other's boundaries when, coming to each other and saying, this client and I, we're not really working together. Can someone else take this? Or, hey, let's talk through this, and really sort of demonstrating that to each other and giving each other those passes too. So then you don't have this situation where you're like, oh, I really feel like I should work all weekend, because of X, Y, and Z, whatever idea I have in my head that I'm going to magically fix everything. And then, but having another person, a sounding board to say, no, come on, we are committed to this. We've committed to this kind of practice, and we've committed to, we want to be doing this for the next 20 years. And how do we keep ourselves healthy? And so I think it's not just about your own actions, but building a culture in our little firm of supporting that, right? And so when people have a day off, that's their day off. We're not sending a bunch of text messages and expecting them to respond. Your time off is your time off, as much as we can, and so sort of, again, demonstrating to each other that those things are important, I think helps.
Right. And of course, if you're a solo practitioner, I mean, you guys both have others who you work with. So certainly celebrating with the team's important, being respectful of the team's dynamics of those who are setting those boundaries, and to some extent covering for each other, being sort of that valve where you can blow off a little bit of steam. If you're a solo, you can still adopt some of those, right? Making sure that your staff knows. I mean, I'm sure it's not just your fellow lawyers in your firms. Make sure the staff knows, if I'm off today, I'm off today, right? And then what about within even the community? I mean, you guys are not islands in immigration and family law. There's other firms. Is there a little bit of even the ability to support each other there?
I think that's really important. So. Yeah. To find some people in the community that even if you're on your own, you can talk to a friend that you can reach out and sort of say, oh my gosh, this seems like a dumb question, but can I ask someone? Because it's just like what they told you in school. Chances are someone else is asking that same question. And then building some trust with your fellow practitioners so that you have a support system. If you're more of a solo practitioner, a lot of people they function better in the way, and they run a successful firm and they're on their own, and that's great. It's just, I think you really need to feel part of a community. And I think that sometimes that can be hard in family law because we're not always on the same side against, criminal defense attorneys, right? They're always on the same side against the state. Or similar to immigration, I mean, often we're against each other. So you really have to sort of find a balance between how can we be cordial? How can we have some trust to talk to each other? Also knowing that sometimes we're going to be on the opposite side of an issue and we're going to get sideways. And so I think the way you do that is you have to commit to being part of a community, or at least that's the way I found it. Right.
And I'm sorry, it goes to the notion, obviously you're going to preserve client confidences. You're not going to share that kind of stuff. But I'm talking more just in terms of maybe what you mentioned, Sarah, in your practice. It's just treating each other respectfully, civilly. And maybe at some point, even being able to blow off a little bit of steam and not feeling like that's going to be taken advantage of. Yeah, I had a really hard week. I know this brief is due Friday. Can I have a couple extra days? Building that sense of camaraderie within that community on that broader scale so that you're supporting each other that way. Rebecca, you tend to probably be on the same side, but I'm guessing that to some extent you're serving often as a mentor for some of the newer lawyers coming in and a resource that somebody can look to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think mentorship is part of what Sarah was mentioning, is that overall, supporting the profession and the civility and all of that is really being able to support up and coming lawyers as well, and allow them to have the power to voice what they need, and to be able to assert that from the very beginning, because that is important to set that, and to make sure that where they're working is the right cultural fit too, because there's even within the community, and if you end up being a sole practitioner, I think that like I have an of counsel who works with me, and she's a sole practitioner, and for example, she's coming up on maternity leave, being able to support her in that and say, okay, we can be there for you. I think that there's different ways that you can support each other. Being able to really take time off, to not be afraid to take time off, you need a pathway to be able to do that. And if that means that with a sole practitioner that they have somebody who can, monitor their cases or provide support or, do a brief entry of appearance or whatever, provides a pathway. That's something that we've even struggled with within my firm, is to be able to really allow people to not only say, oh, you need to take time off. You really need to take time off. We all need to take time off. But you have to have a way to be able to do that. You have to be able to shift your burdens. You have to have somebody who's willing to cover you so that you can actually disconnect. And that requires planning and protocols and that sort of thing. And again, if you're a sole practitioner, being able to build within the community so that you have someone who could help support you in that as well. And again, as new attorneys, being able to say, this is what I need, and being able to voice that is really important, because they're the ones that will continue to shift the profession, hopefully in a more positive and self-care orientated direction.
Yeah. I think those are great points in terms of what you're doing within the practice to support each other, to support the true need to have time off, to have time away. And of course, Sarah earlier talked about a couple of important things, but boundaries with your clients, being realistic with yourself and others. You can't do everything. You can't solve every problem. I've got a friend who's a criminal defense attorney, and he told me one time, really, what I'm doing some days with my clients is damage control, and it's not fun, but the client's in a really difficult legal predicament. And the best I can do is hope for the best outcome within that really difficult legal predicament, and not get myself wrapped around this notion that I've got to, put on the Superman cape and save the day for this client, because I can't. And so I've got to be realistic about it. And I loved it. In fact, I hope I'm going to attribute it obviously to you, Sarah, but I'm going to use it in the future. That notion, that imagery of being on the airplane and you've got to put your mask on first before you can help others. I think that's perfect in terms of self-care, which is, I want to just spend a couple more minutes talking about that self-care. And you've both talked a little bit about it already, right? The things we all know that we should be doing: exercise routinely, watch your diet, right? Getting sufficient sleep, which more and more people are talking about sleep as such a critical factor in our brain functioning and being effective, just as a person as well as a lawyer. And taking vacations, real vacations, right? Not just a 3-day weekend and call that your vacation, but actually getting some time away. Whereas, as Rebecca said, you find a way to make sure that all of the practice obligations are covered, so you're not worrying about them while you're gone, and you can actually unplug and decompress. But what about on a daily basis? And I don't want to put you guys on the spot, if it's what you've seen others doing or if it's what you yourself do. What do you guys do just to refresh and recharge daily, weekly, that sort of thing? Sarah, what do you think? If you do, let me put you on the spot.
It's all right. I've been on the spot before. I am a person, and I think part of this is you have to realize what your strengths and weaknesses are in terms of your ability to care for yourself, right? And so I am someone who will start thinking about 15,000 things from the beginning of the day, and it will just, build and build and build until the end of the day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 3:00. How do I not have everything done? And so sort of what I really like, and I think this is from Dr. Mate in your article, Bill, talking about start your day quietly. So rather than jumping up and saying, okay, I've got to pack these lunches, I've got to do this thing, and making, starting the day, just sort of I'm going to take some breaths. I do try and get some kind of meditation, and I'm not great at it, but I'm trying, and sort of building in some things like that to take just some time to breathe and think. And I know that when I get spun up, just saying, stop, take some breaths. This is not the end of the world. You're going to have one foot in front of the other, and doing that really helps me. And so on a very daily basis, when I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Monday morning or it's Friday morning and the pile isn't any smaller than it was on Monday morning, right? And you've still got all these things to sort of say, okay, let's sit, Let's just be quiet with ourselves. Again, sometimes you only have 5 minutes to do it, but I find it helpful to sort of stop the spinning.
Yeah, to actually take conscious awareness of it. I am spinning. I've got to put the brakes on it. I've got to take a breath and do something. Rebecca, something similar? What do you do on a daily basis to try to stay sane?
Well, like Sarah, I do try to have some self-reflection in the morning. I switch out my activities. Sometimes I'll do 5 or 10 minutes of meditation. I also like doing journaling, just like a free write for 10 minutes. I set my timer and I'll just pick a random topic and journal. That also is helpful because it's something I can go back and reflect on as well. And incorporating some gratitude in there is also huge. I mean, really practicing gratitude of being able to spend a little bit of time being thankful for the things, that we have in our lives, the people, the health. And then also trying to treat myself with the same type of compassion as I would treat the loved ones in my life. So I think that sometimes in your own head, the negative self-talk is super, super destructive. And I think it's one of those things that we've used to drive ourselves and drive that productivity. You've got to work harder. You've got to, dig in more. Why are you taking so long? And like that sort of thing. You would never talk to, your partner, or your children that way, or even your colleagues. So why would you talk to yourself that way? And I think that trying to cultivate that kindness to yourself is really important on a daily basis as well.
Yeah, and that's great. I think that's a great place actually to finish it, that kindness to yourself, right? I think that underscores it. You've got to be good to yourself, right? Because when you're good to yourself, it refreshes you, it recharges you, it gives you that ability then to go out and fight the good fight for your clients, and bring to the table that emotion that you need to be effective without absorbing it all and damaging yourself in the process. It's been great to talk to you guys. It's always great to talk to you guys. And I really appreciate the time that you've given us today to talk about this topic. It's a topic I feel fairly passionate about, and lawyer well-being in general. But the idea that we've got to take care of ourselves. So I want to thank you both very much. I want to thank the listeners and thank the State Bar for giving us the opportunity to do this. And thank you all for listening to Wellbeing in Action. Sarah, Rebecca, thank you guys. I hope to see you down the road.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Wellbeing Committee and the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Gil Flores. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, or legal advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.